What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Sean Davis, and welcome into another episode of our preseason power ranking series where we stop and rank all 30 teams from number 30 to number 1. And today we have the reveal of our number 29th ranked team in this series. That is the Washington Wizards. I really appreciate you guys' support here on the channel recently. It means a lot to us here at Sports Headlines. Do us a big favor. We're trying to hit a massive goal of 10,000 subscribers by the time the season starts. We have a bunch of giveaways to this season, so really do us a big favor. If you guys are new, hit that subscribe button, leave a like here on the channel. Takes 2 seconds, guys. Great way to help out the channel. If you're a basketball fan, there's no better place than the Sports Headlines Show. Hit that subscribe button. Thanks so much for tuning in. We're here with the Wizards, and the Wizards are a team that I've been pretty critical of in the past. They come here 29, still in this 6th tier of mine of teams that are rebuilding. And I think that the Wizards finally picked a direction last season when they finally traded Bradley Beal. They drafted Bilal Coulibaly, and it started this youth movement here in Washington. And I'm going to give Washington a lot of credit for said youth movement, kind of realizing where they're at. They even had a guy, Denny Avdia, who I think they really did like, but with Denny Avdia saying, you know what, no, we're going to go get our guard of the future, which was a need for me this offseason for the Wizards, and they trade Denny Avdia. They sacrifice some wing depth in air quotes, even though they still had some here on the roster, and they go get the 14th pick of the ultimately, turn around and use on a guard in the lottery. I think that before we get this started, I want to give them credit. Too many times, I'm going to start this off similarly that I did with the Nets. Too many times we see teams be helplessly stuck in the middle. I think the current example of this is probably what the Bulls were like for the past 5 years or so, but now the Bulls are kind of, I think, trending towards a youth movement. I think the best current example is probably the Atlanta Hawks, where it's like, okay, what are we doing here? Honestly, the Miami Heat might be trending this way. The Heat, not in a mediocrity type way, but okay, like I think we've tapped out on this Jimmy run, but that's for another video. Let's just start with the Wizards, right? Like I said, they're in the process of a youth movement, and they had a lot of movement here this offseason. They bring in Malcolm Brogdon via trade. They trade for Malcolm Brogdon and the 14th pick using Denny Avdia. Denny Avdia being one of the key departures, obviously. And with Malcolm Brogdon, I think that adding in Brogdon for this team is going to be really, really important, because I think Brogdon can mentor, to a certain extent, even a guy like Jordan Poole, and mentor, more importantly, I think, a Bub Carrington. And that's the type of guy I think would be great for that locker room. And then they bring in Jonas Valanciunas. So we'll talk more about like what Jonas Valanciunas does as a player later on. But bringing in Jonas Valanciunas more so indicates to me that they view Alex Sarr, at least in the early days of this rebuild/retool, they view Alex Sarr more as a 4/5, rather a 5/4, and just having some more lineup versatility where you can put 2 big lineups out there. You can still run your small ball, in air quotes, Alex Sarr at the 5 lineups and still be fine there. So I think Jonas Valanciunas, the contract is a bit puzzling. I don't really understand giving him a 3-year, $30 million contract. I don't particularly understand it, but hey, if that's what it takes to get him in the building, I guess. And then he gets Saddiq Bey in a 3-year, $20 million contract. A guy that I think is not going to play a ton this season, but Saddiq Bey can add some floor spacing. I like Saddiq Bey for Washington. And then their draft, I was a bit more critical of Keyshawn George throughout this draft cycle. But I think a landing spot like Washington is a perfect destination for Keyshawn George, where there's not any pressure put on him to really be anything year 1. Hell, maybe not even year 2. But he's a guy that has fun upside traits, has some connected playmaking ability, an elite 3-point shooter. We'll talk more about his limitations later on when we get to the roster, the roster build and how we feel about these players. Bub Carrington, I touched on him a little bit earlier, but Bub is a really, really intriguing fit here in Washington, where my comp for Bub Carrington is somewhat along the lines of like current day D'Angelo Russell, where with Bub Carrington, first off, incredible jump shooter. He has legitimate feel as a playmaker and the ability to make a multitude of different reads. He's also the youngest player in this draft class, and you just see the raw ability and the legitimate upside. He's probably the most skilled pull-up jump shooter in this draft class, where he hit over 100 pull-up jumpers at Pittsburgh, shot 35+% on pick and roll threes, has really nice size for a guard as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but I really like the combination of Bub Carrington and Alex Sarr as your 1-2 punch down the line, and you throw in a Bilal Coulibaly. Who knows what the future is with Kyle Kuzma, but you throw that in, and then you're really cooking here. And then you get Alex Sarr, and Alex Sarr, in my opinion, was the best prospect in this draft class, and he's not the most polished guy, for sure. I think there are some feel stuff, right, where I think you're like, you really, really wish that was there. The shooting is more of a in theory thing right now with Alex Sarr, but there are legitimate moments where you're like, oh crap, this can be real with Alex Sarr, and he's a really, really good player, I feel, and I think he can be, I think my pro comp for him is like Evan Mobley / Jaren Jackson Jr. He has real like wing / forward skill sets with his ability to handle the ball, or the flashes of that at least. His agility is incredible. We'll talk about all that stuff later. Deni Avdija, they bring in Brian Keefe as well. I forgot to add that here on the graphic, but Brian Keefe is the new head coach here in Washington. Brian Keefe, more of a defensive mind, and it'll be interesting to see how this all pans out for this group here in Washington. They lose Daniel Gafford at the deadline. They grab a future first. I want to say it's a future first for Daniel Gafford. He was a fine player for them, but I think you kind of had to do that to get off of him, and you got good value, I want to say, back. You got a first-round pick for Daniel Gafford if you're really good about that. Deni Avdija is easily the biggest asset out this offseason, but I think if you compare that to what they brought in, this is a really good offseason for the Washington Wizards, and a lot of optimism here for the future. It's going to be a rough year this year, but honestly, you want that, because imagine you get to pair this core of Alex Sarr, Bub Carrington, Bilal Coulibaly, and let's just say you get lucky enough to get the number 1 overall pick again. You're lucky enough to get a Cooper Flagg, an Ace Bailey, a Dylan Harper, Noah Traore, etc., etc. Washington can very quickly turn this rebuild around. And what I was going to say about Brian Keefe, I don't feel like Brian Keefe is the long-term answer. I feel like Brian Keefe more than likely is a transitional coach, and there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but I feel like he is just a transitional coach, and then you get your heavy hitter in here. I really, really wanted Washington to go after a Jordy Fernandez or a David Allen, but Washington, I feel like they're going more transitional approach, keep it in-house for right now. And yeah, we are going to now dive into this roster and see how we feel about each of these players to get a little bit more in depth with some of our grading for these guys. And let's start off with obviously the starter, similar setup to the Nets episode, or as will every episode be. No special guests on this episode. We will get some special guests down the line, but let's start off with Jordan Poole. Starting off with Jordan Poole here. And he had a down year in terms of his shooting production, but he still has solid value offensively. He still does a really good job at getting to the rim, being crafty enough to finish around taller, more athletic players, because it's not like Jordan Poole is the most explosive physical athlete. Now, he is still very much a shifty ball handler where he has a bunch of different, dribble move combinations in his arsenal. You combine that with the fact that he is still a legitimate off-screen threat, where he shot 40+% on off-screen threes last season. He's a solid enough of a playmaker with a wide range of passes in his tool belt, but the turnovers, whether it's due to bad reads or just like over dribbling and not reading the defender correctly, can be a legitimate problem at times. But he's still a good enough offensive player, I think, to be a starter day one. I think he kind of turned it around down the stretch here, hoping if you're a Wizards fan that does continue heading into the next season. And I think with Jordan Poole is like, can he finally realize and mature and say, some of these shots I just have to stop taking, like the 35-foot heat check when you're 1 for 7 or whatever from 3. You know what I'm saying? Like, the Jordan Poole viewing experience is very polarizing, and I think it's because he does take up a bunch of bad shots, and I think he does try to be overly flashy, if you will, And I think it does cost him at times. I think that might be a reason why he's not in Golden State still, along with the whole Draymond punching incident. So Jordan Poole is a fine offensive player. Like I said, solid playmaker. I'm curious to see how like some Valanciunas and Jordan Poole 2-man game can operate this season. And I'm rooting for Jordan Poole truly, because I think when Jordan Poole was playing well, this was one of my first like correct breakout candidates heading into their championship year. I called out like how he was going to be 6-man of the year starting caliber player, and he was incredible. And then he gets paid, and then he does have that dip in Golden State because of a lot of the issues they had going over there. And then he wasn't the best last season. What I was hoping for another like kind of semi breakout. Looks like we haven't gotten that, but I'm still rooting for Jordan Poole. He's still at times a really fun player. And then they have Corey Kispert as alongside him, who is a flat out elite off ball player, where he is a phenomenal great, not phenomenal great. He's a phenomenal off ball cutter and relocator. His timing on slot cuts and baseline cuts, combined with his ability as an off ball shooter, especially coming off of pin down, staggers, flares, etc., is incredible. And the one thing I will give like Brian Keefe some of his credit for is I think how they kind of implemented some of the off-ball movement in Washington, where that's going to be a kind of a common theme. I talked about Jordan Poole being a pretty good off-screen threat. Corey Kispert, a great off-ball player. Kuz is a solid cutter. Bilal Coulibaly is a great cutter and great kind of connected, not great, but a solid enough connected playmaker. We'll talk about him a little bit later on. But Corey Kispert is kind of magnified in that sense through this offense. And he does some stuff as a screener too, which leverages into his shooting game nicely. Now, I think his best trait is easily the shooting, right? Where he's incredibly versatile in that regard, where he shot at least 35% or higher on pick and roll man, so pick and pop attempts, transition threes, off screen threes, spot up possessions. Like, he is elite as a shooter. You would like him to be able to attack closeouts a little bit better and be more of a reliable playmaker, but he's really damn good at what he's good at. And that's the shooting, that's the off-ball relocation, and play next to Jordan Poole, who is going to be the primary ball handler in that starting five, or Malcolm Brogdon or Bub Carrington, and then Kuz is going to have a bunch of the offensive load as well. We don't necessarily need him to be a consistent playmaker. Although the attacking closeouts bit and the finishing around the rim, you would like to be a little bit more consistent from a Corey Kispert. And then you got Kyle Kuzma, who is coming off his most impactful season to date, which was 2022-2023 in terms of EPM estimated plus minus. Kuz had his worst impact season since the 2020-2021 season, where he was back on the Lakers. And a part of that, I think, can be attributed to the uptick in offensive role. And honestly, what he was asked to do at both ends of the floor a little bit. We'll talk about the defense later. On a more positive note with Kuz, he had a career high in assist percentage while maintaining a solid, turnover percentage. So his assist turnover ratio is still pretty solid. And I think that's the biggest misconception about Kyle Kuzma's game in 2024, just from my conversations with Laker fans on the timeline on Twitter, where it's like, oh man, Kuz is not a good defender, Kuz is a bad playmaker. I'm like, guys, go watch Kyle Kuzma play basketball for the Washington Wizards. Both of those things, for sure, the playmaking part, I just don't think are true anymore. He is a legitimate playmaker. He can make reads from the perimeter. He can make reads as a post-up scorer, which actually he was a really, really good post-up scorer last season, where he has great touch, great footwork around the rim. And you combine that with the improved playmaking, where he can make legitimate reads now. And you can kind of amplify that with the amount of movement that Washington has off the ball with the cuts and the off-screen stuff. And I think Washington does a good job of leaning into this aspect of Kyle Kuzma's game. It was really, really fun to watch last season. And the biggest concern, and this is where I think there's a massive disconnect with the Kyle Kuzma analysis, is the biggest concern with Kuz isn't the playmaking, isn't the defense. It has and always has been, I feel, been the reliability of the jumper. He shot 35% on catch and shoot looks this season. He shot burst energy. He shot albeit, 46.1% uncontested looks, which I want to say is a career high. But he only shot 29% on both contested looks and pull-up threes. So Kuz's offensive game is going to be this, where depending on the team, if he's on a team like Washington, I almost said Charlotte, if he's on a team like Washington, he's a 20 to 22-ish point per game scorer, or on a contending team, he's like a 13 to 17 points per game scorer, and that is always going to vary based off his ability to hit, catch, and shoot threes and be able to be a reliable pull-up jump shooter. And that's the biggest reason why I feel he's not a number one option, not even a number two option, right, on a really, really good team. At best, I think Kuz is your third option, and even that you feel kind of iffy about because the jumper just isn't always consistent. He can hit it, and I think he can get crafty, get in his bag, if you will, and hit contested pull-up jumpers and hit and create separation, get to and create space from three and things of that nature, right? But the reliability of that has always been Kuz's biggest problem, I feel. And it's the reason why, he's not this ultra dynamic offensive player, because his reliability as a jump shooter is just, not where you want it to be. And then Alex Sarr, we kind of talked about him earlier. I think right now, I think he's a better play finisher than he is a play initiator or a stuff creator right now. But the potential of that stuff is so fun and high, I feel. Where if I'm Washington, my number two, my top three or so priorities this season all revolve around my rookies or second-year players. It's give Alex Sarr, Bilal Coulibaly, and Bub Carrington the opportunity to make mistakes and to go through the growing pains of being freshman and sophomore players in the NBA. And I think Alex Sarr, he can hypothetically space the floor and be a catch and shoot threat. I like the pick and pop ability from Alex Sarr. I think day one, a lot of his best traits are going to come on the defensive end, and we'll talk about that stuff in a little bit. And you would like for it to be more feel. I think there's been moments where okay, cool, the feel is starting to come around with Alex Sarr, and he's able to make some plays as a delay playmaker, as a post playmaker, etc. But Alex Sarr does have some work to do offensively, but the potential is crazy, and this is a building block here for the Washington Wizards, and you hope to combine this with an ultra dynamic player in your future. And then you have Jonas Valanciunas, who I think offensively, he's still a credible, very credible post-up threat against mismatches and opposing bigs. He was the 12th best scorer in the post amongst players with at least 80 scoring possessions during the regular season and playoffs. And I want to say there was 50 players that met that criteria. So he was a really, really good post scorer. He has really good touch around the basket and great body positioning, where if you let Jonas Valanciunas duck you in and bury you under the basket, it's almost over for you unless you're a Giannis, a Anthony Davis type player, right? It's almost over for you, where you have to be this uber athletic but yet still physically dominant player to recover if he's able to get you that far underneath the basket. I think his body positioning is definitely some of the best I've seen throughout this series so far. I think he has the ability to hit pick and pop threes, so I stretch the floor. Last season, he shot around 30% on spot up threes, which is a big drop off, where the 2022-23 season, he shot almost 36% on catch and shoot looks, which you're hoping for is that Jonas Valanciunas can get back to that level where he is a credible threat from the perimeter. You combine that with Sarr, and you can still kind of go with your 5-out stuff and not lose too much of your floor spacing. Whereas if Jonas Valanciunas is at 29-30%, 3-point shooter, then you're not in the best of spots. I think the biggest problem I think with Valanciunas offensively is that he's not this reliable playmaker, and he does have some troubles making reads or being a capable passer out of the lay setup. And if you combine that with the inconsistent shooting like he was at 23, then that really limits his offensive impact, in my opinion. And then you get a reason why New Orleans isn't all the way invested in a Jonas Valanciunas anymore, because he's not stretching the floor. He's not this good delay playmaker or anything like that in the modern NBA. And I think while he is a good offensive rebounder, really good rebounder, he is a still a really good finisher around the rim. And we already talked about his post-up technique and ability. I think if he's not a good enough, floor spacer, or we already talked about the playmaking woes, then there's a world, and I think that's the reason why they said, hey, look, we're only going to give you $10 million because we want the ability to say we're not going to play you consistently. And I think those two things are going to be more important because I'm not gonna lie. How much are the Wizards really gonna go to their offensive playbook and say, all right, we're gonna build a quarter of our offense around Jonas Valanciunas post up catches in 2024? I think that's pretty unlikely. So Valanciunas, I think he needs to be back to that 2022-23 level of a floor spacer to maximize some of his offensive value. And then we get to some of their bench depth, if you will, and then Malcolm Brogdon here is a nice pickup. We talked about the pickup because of his ability as a locker room leader / mentor, I feel, for a Bub Carrington, to a certain extent, even a Jordan Poole. But I think the biggest problem, and it's the most no duh type of scenario with Malcolm Brogdon, it's his freaking reliability, man. Like, he came off his healthiest season in Boston since his sophomore campaign. And he didn't touch more than 40 games last season in Portland. I want to say he played 37 games last season in Portland, where he dealt with a serious elbow injury. He had to get some plasma work done on his elbow. And if he's healthy and the elbow injury isn't an issue that lingers heading into this season, he's still a really good offensive player where he has a lot of, really good quality skill sets as an as an offensive player. He's a good playmaker that consistently has really, really low turnover rates. He's a super versatile scorer on and off the ball, where he shot 55.8% on spot threes last season per Synergy and was in the 99th percentile in spot-up scoring efficiency last season, which can be super, super valuable with a Kuz and a Jordan Poole and an Alex Sarr and a Corey Kispert. He's going to fit in perfectly to this offense, I feel, if he's able to stay healthy. And dare I say, more importantly, if he stays healthy, which Washington really needs him to stay healthy, he can be a legitimate mentor for Bub and Keyshawn. But more importantly, if he's healthy and good and the elbow injury is washed, is not a problem anymore, he's going to be a likely trade candidate come February at the trade deadline, where you can get a title contender that's in need of a Sixth Man of the Year. He just won Sixth Man of the Year 2 years ago. That's in the need of a Sixth Man of the Year caliber scorer / playmaker off the bench to help give them a boost. Healthy Malcolm Brogdon could be great for a team like the Lakers, for example, or a healthy Malcolm Brogdon could be the spark plug off the bench that the Clippers need, etc., etc. Malcolm Brogdon, if he's healthy, if he was healthy throughout his career, he would have made so much more money. But Malcolm Brogdon was just on one of the best teams of the NBA 2 seasons ago. He gets traded. You do that deal a billion times out of $1 billion for Boston for Jrue Holiday. But, man, you need him healthy because I think he actually adds some nice versatility to this offense for Washington. And then you need him healthy for his ability to be a tradable asset come February. Because I don't think it's crazy that they could get a first-round pick for Malcolm Brogdon. Let me look up his contract information really, really fast. But I don't think it's that crazy. No, it's not that crazy. He's on, if I recall correctly, he is on an expiring contract this season. Yeah, he's an expiring contract. He's 32 years old. I could see a team go, you know what, we are all in on winning right now. We are fine with trading a protected or whatever first-round pick to get ourselves a backup point guard that is a six-man caliber player. Malcolm Brogdon needs to stay healthy because I think they could really, really use him and flip him at the deadline. And then we have Bilal Coulibaly, who I do have trending upwards as a player. And it's because right now he's not this super reliable offensive player due to just the inconsistent shooting. He does have some worry with the turnovers and stuff like that. Just needs to get better with the ball in his hands in general, I feel. The creation stuff isn't all the way there right now either. But he still does some really, really good stuff offensively. He's a much more capable connected playmaker that I think he gets credit for, that's a real ball mover and it can make legitimate reads. I thought there were moments last season where Washington used them in some fun ways, where they would use them as a short roll playmaker. There's a play where he's in the short roll and he's able to hit Kuz. I know it might have been Corey Kispert in the corner for a wide open corner three. And I think that continuation of his development, where the turnovers and the consistency with his reads and his ball handling, I think that's why his potential is so sky high, and that's why he was this late riser, I feel, in last year's draft process, where he played for Wemby's team, and we're all like, oh my goodness, Wemby, and then everybody all of a sudden goes, oh shit, this Bilal Coulibaly kid is really, really good, and the jumper isn't completely broken. That was a big criticism of him coming into the draft process. There's some confidence in the shot, and I like that. I mean, he took roughly 3 attempts per game. I low-key want to see that volume, increase next season, continue to have the confidence in the shot. He does have, at least on last year's film, a little bit of a slower wind-up that I think you would like to see him work on a little bit in terms of his release on his jumper, right? But he's a super active off-ball cutter and a more than capable finisher around the basket. Like, the combination of Bilal Coulibaly and Corey Kispert in terms of their off-ball cutting and movement is super, super dynamic. And I think this offense is going to benefit a lot from that. And if the turnovers really, really improve and he can cut back on those but increase some of the playmaking stuff, this is going to be a really, really good player. And I think offensively, he has a lot of room for growth. And I think the sky's the limit for Bilal Coulibaly. And then we have a couple of draft prospects. We have Bub Carrington. And we have Keyshawn George. Bub, like I mentioned earlier, really, really skilled pull-up jump shooter that has super dynamic feel as a playmaker, where he can make really, really nice reads. I think this is one of his first years playing point guard. He had a pretty late growth spurt, if I recall correctly. One of the youngest players in this draft class, and I think he's in the perfect situation. I'm actually going to read from my scouting report. Is amongst the youngest players in this draft class, and in the right situation where he gets to sit and develop, he can turn into something special. There is no pressure on Bilal Coulibaly. I'm sorry, not Bilal Coulibaly. Bub Carrington. There is no pressure on Bub Carrington to be something year one. And that's what I mean by sit and develop. Not necessarily in the sense of like, okay, don't play him year one, but in the sense of you have Malcolm Brogdon and you have Jordan Poole. Corey Kispert's going to eat up some of the 2-guard minutes. Bilal Coulibaly is going to eat up some of the 2 minutes, I think, as well, while being a 3-2. I think this is the perfect situation for him, where he can sit behind 2 veterans, if you will, one more so of an established veteran in Malcolm Brogdon. But also, I think, like I said earlier, go through some of those, growing pains as a player, where I think one of his biggest, one of my biggest concerns with Bub Carrington heading into the draft cycle was that just the over-reliance on shooting jumpers. Only 13% of his shot attempts in the half court were at the rim. He was also a pretty bad finisher. I'm curious to see what the finishing looks like with NBA floor spacing. But I think that's also to a certain extent due to the fact that he doesn't create any real space right now due to not being this great athlete with the ball in his hands. He isn't the shiftiest ball handler in terms of be able to create separation for himself, not even due to his athleticism, but due to just the shiftiness and the craftiness of his handle. So he does shoot a fairly high amount of tough pull-up jumpers, hence where I came up with the pro comp of like a D'Angelo Russell. But there isn't any pressure on Bub Carrington to succeed right now. He can go through the growing pains. I really, really like Bub Carrington. And I thought that was a great pickup. I have him 17th on my board. You get him 14th in the draft. That's more than fine value, in my opinion. Go get your guy. And then they get Keyshawn George. And Keyshawn George, I was admittedly a little bit disappointed with when I watched and evaluated his film, considering where his draft stock was. Because there were a lot of draft analysts I respect that had him as a top 12 player in this class, that had him going to teams like Utah at 10, Portland at 14. And I just never could get behind that take at all. I wound up having a late first, early second round grade on Keyshawn George. And another situation, actually, where I did say, put him in a spot where he can actually sit and develop. Okay, cool. Now we can maybe tap into some of that upside, because I do think there is upside there. He is a solid I'm going to say really good connected playmaker with the ability to hit secondary reads and set up teammates nicely. I think that's supported due to the fact that he played point guard for a while, but shifted to being more of a wing due to a late growth spurt. A really dynamic jump shooter, shot 42.7% on catch-and-shoot looks in Miami and 35% on pull-up threes. I think with Keyshawn George, for him to really work as a player, the jumper has to be, that has to be real at the NBA level. Not necessarily 42.7% on catch-and-shoot looks. I mean, that'd be great, but something to that degree at the NBA level if he wants to have, moderate levels of success, I feel. Because my biggest concerns with him is I don't buy the self-creation, which I feel like a lot of the people that were higher on him did. I don't buy the self-creation ability, don't buy the handle. Doesn't shoot up, just lack the mid-range game. It did look really natural for him in Miami. And again, limits his ability to get to the rim because he's not a good athlete, in my opinion. Doesn't have a great first step. So he's shooting about a ton of tough, 3-point jumpers. Because again, he can't get to the rim, not shooting a bunch of mid-ranges. So I just have my legitimate concerns with Keyshawn George. It was a fine pick, and this is a landing spot where I would feel a lot more comfortable about his upside and reaching it. And then we have some bigs. We have Rashawn Holmes and Marvin Bagley that I think are just fine at their roles, at their jobs at this point. 2 later additions to the roster. I think these are fine additions for depth. They have really nice depth that will add in with their bigs with Alex Sarr, Jonas Valanciunas, Rashawn Holmes, Marvin Bagley, Tristan Vukcevic. I like the fact that he can space the floor. I think that's a trend with what they want with their bigs here in Washington. The problem is with Vukcevic, I don't know how much he's going to get an opportunity to play this season. And then Johnny Davis here. It's going to be the last one I really, really want to highlight here. Johnny Davis is going to be one of my worst draft takes officially ever. That's gonna be one of my worst draft takes. I loved his ability to operate from the mid-range game. I bought the athleticism when he came out of Wisconsin. I thought he was gonna be a solid on-ball defender, really score out of the pick and roll. I did say he needed to do a much better job of finishing through contact. That was a legitimate concern of mine, and he just wasn't much of a playmaker at Wisconsin. I did highlight that I needed that to kind of come around with Johnny Davis. And unfortunately, he just never really got going for Washington, unfortunately. Last season, in the regular season, he shot 49.3% at the rim last season per Synergy. You go back to the season prior, he shot well the season prior, but didn't play much at all. Even if you go to the G League, 55% at the rim on layups. In the half court, rather, he only shot 52%. G League last season, excuse me. So just did not play well, and I'm for sure starting to lose some hope with Johnny Davis turning out and making that draft take age semi well. So Johnny Davis, damn. Now let's talk about this defense here and some of the defensive side of the floor with these guys. And let's start off with Jordan Poole once again. Jordan Poole is just a complete liability defensively. Teams relentlessly attack him where he has just flat out bad technique. The lack of size and elite athleticism really flash off. What saves him from being the worst guard defender in the NBA is the fact that he is an okay playmaker defensively, where he had a career high in steal percentage. His defensive, concerns were like I said, he is a flat out liability, and that's something that this starting five does have. I do have legitimate question marks about, because I think honestly, year one, the best defender in this starting five is going to be a rookie. It's going to be the second overall pick, nonetheless. But with Jordan Poole, the fact that his defensive concerns are so extreme with his offensive inefficiencies is why I think his overall impact and the thoughts on Jordan Poole is declining. And you combine that with Corey Kispert, who I think he competes defensively and he navigates screens, off-ball screens at a fairly decent rate. So they both have this one redeeming trait about them, both him and Jordan Poole. But he's just not quick enough to keep it front defensively. You combine that with the fact that his technique when guarding the ball is really, really poor. And what I mean by technique a lot of times is your how you open up. What's your stance when you're guarding the ball? Like, how much do you potentially show towards one angle of the floor and give up an open driving lane? And I feel like that happens way too often. He opens up way too wide, especially when guarding in ball screen scenarios, which gets him off balance, where a simple bump can get him out of position, and it leads to easy baskets more times than not. Like I said, he competes defensively, and he navigates off-ball screens. I think he does contest shots at a nice rate, so I'll give him that for, like, the redeeming trait, if you will. But, you know, Corey Kispert is just a flat-out bad defender. And then you have Kyle Kuzma, who's, I think, a solid defender. And again, I think he's actually coming off of the 2022-23 season where, I mean, that was just his best year of his career. But I also think that was his most impactful defensive year of his career. And this year, again, defensively took a pretty, decent size step back. That could be possibly attributed to just having a poor team. I think we saw this with the Brooklyn Nets players, where players that had the reputation of being good defenders that are veterans, maybe took a step back in terms of impact. But to a certain extent, you could attribute that to them being in an awful situation and them just, like I said in the Nets episode, just not really giving an F anymore. And I think to a certain extent that could apply here to with Kyle Kuzma. I think you could also attribute it to being like he went through a role change where he went from being a helper defensively as his primary defensive role in the 22-23 season, where you saw his highest defensive impact, to being more used as a wing stopper. And I think he's fine as a wing stopper, but I think what Kuz is best at is where you can utilize him and utilize the versatility, where he can be this dynamic on and off ball defender, where he can help out the rim, be in the passing lanes, while also using his length and guarding in isolation, guarding ball screens. Because I do think he uses his length well in isolation to guard wings and has solid, lateral movement for his size. He does have the tendency to kind of get out of position and unnecessarily gamble for blocks and steals, or just jump at shot fakes. But in a winning situation, I would be really curious to see his versatility on full display. And I doubt it because of the rest of the roster, but I would be interested in seeing them tap into his versatility again. I would anticipate that he's continued to be used as a wing stopper, because you look at your backcourt, it's not great in terms of defense. You look at your front court besides Kuz, you're likely going to deploy like an Alex Sarr as a helper and Jonas Valanciunas as an anchor big. So you need somebody to be that wing stopper / primary, on-ball defender. I think that's likely going to be Kuz. And then Alex Sarr, like I said, I think he's probably their best defender right now in terms of anticipated role and just skill set, where he's this elite rangy athlete, where his agility as a 7'1" freak really, really flashes. He moves so well in terms of the ability to move downhill, which I think would be big for his ability as a drop big in the future, and laterally. So this is the guy that I think with this team, if they were to get super versatile with in terms of their scheme and personnel usage, Alex Sarr would be the guy they do it with. I think I completely buy the athleticism, the ranginess, the weak side shot blocking next to Valanciunas is going to be really, really cool to see. And just wait for him to fill out his frame. And this is where I can, again, get the Valanciunas signing a bit more. By getting Valanciunas, you let Sarr naturally develop and build out his frame a little bit more. And instead of, Sarr, kind of similar to what the Spurs did a little bit with Wemby, actually. With Sarr, the frame will naturally build out, and some of the bigger, tougher matchups, at least at the start of the year, they'll let Valanciunas handle those. And I think Sarr's biggest weaknesses are kind of, hidden a little bit by the combination of Kuz and Valanciunas in different ways, with Kuz Kuz is a good defensive rebounder, just a good rebounder in general. Sarr's biggest weakness is the rebounding, I feel, and the size and the frame. And both Kuz helps with the rebounding, but then you also have Jonas Valanciunas here, who sure has his limitations as a defender, and it's just mostly the fact that he is a penciled in drop coverage defender. Like, there's not much else you can really get out of Jonas Valanciunas at this stage. He's an incredible defensive rebounding threat where he does a great job of kind of just throwing his body around and boxing out and getting out of area rebounds on the defensive glass. Like I said, he's pretty limited in terms of his scheme versatility with ball screens. He's primarily a drop defender that struggles with lateral movement if you're able to attack him in space. And that's where you saw teams like the Lakers, the Thunder even really made it tough for the Pelicans to keep him on the floor. But again, we just need him on this roster right now for some lineup versatility and the ability to play two big lineups and not have the entire burden of the opposing fives going to a young guy in Alex Sarr. Like, it would be brutal for Alex Sarr match up with a Bam and a Joel Embiid 3 to 4 times a year. Now you have somebody that can also help anchor that load, where Jonas Valanciunas is still a really solid post player, where I think he does have good body positioning down there on the block. Limited in terms of his scheme versatility, but he's fine. I don't love the rim protection person for Valanciunas, especially in drop, but what he does, he's fine at. I think he's a good compliment. Malcolm Brogdon, defensively, he's a solid on-ball defender where he navigates ball screens at a pretty good level, and it can be beneficial for a contending team. Has the ability to guard quicker guards in space. It is really just a high IQ basketball player away from the ball. Not this great defender anymore, maybe even in the first place, right? But Malcolm Brogdon is a good player, and I'm more so just making the point again for a team to freaking trade for Malcolm Brogdon if he's healthy. Brogdon, stay healthy, get yourself another contract, and the Wizards want you to stay healthy so they can trade you. Because I think it would be a mistake for Washington to invest into Malcolm Brogdon a ton long term. And maybe they've already said, yeah, we want to do that. We're just waiting on the perfect time to offer him the contract extension. But I think that'd be a mistake personally. And then Bilal Coulibaly. And apologies on my end, I suppose, if I kind of sped through Malcolm Brogdon, because, oh my goodness, I wanted to talk about Bilal Coulibaly's defense, because defensively, I am all freaking in on Bilal Coulibaly. I mean, as I was last season, too, in the draft process. I think with Bilal Coulibaly, he's for one probably going to be at the top of my list when I do my top 10 breakout candidates heading into next season, or my top 8 or whatever breakout candidates, because for one, I just buy the athletic ability to move and guard in space. He's such a great mover. He navigates screens at a really good level, does a good job trying to just make every shot tough. You see the motor, I feel, at such a young age, which is encouraging. Despite the athleticism, despite the ability to navigate screens and keep up in space, I think his best attribute that we saw in film last season might just be his reaction time and his recovery speed, whether if you send him a bump, he can still contest and get a really good contest. I thought there were plays where he was guarding Luka Doncic and SGA and legitimately held his own. I think he is inconsistent a little bit defensively. That's why we're not going to, grade him out super well defense. I mean, well, crap, we give him a light blue. That's the highest grade that any player has gotten on this team in this video. And the third best grade you could get from me defensively is this light blue color, if you will. But going back to his reaction time and his recovery speed, it's a play in a game against the Memphis Grizzlies where he gets crossed and legitimately falls on the ground, but he just pops back up so damn fast and is somehow able to recover and get to the rim and block the shot. His weak side rim protection at his side, but with his wingspan, is so elite. I think he has the potential, if he's able to stay on the floor and show up the inconsistencies with his offensive game, he has the potential to be a two-way demon for this team. And defensively, he has the potential to be the best perimeter defender in the game because of his versatility on and off the ball. Like, not name Ryan Dunn. I have a hard time naming 5 guys that I've evaluated over these past 3 years that I thought were better defensive prospects than Bilal Coulibaly from the perimeter, and he's just flat out incredible. And then you get to the rest of this roster. You got, Bub Carrington. Bub Carrington, I think he has some upside as a defender. I think he does navigate ball screens well. I think he uses his length where he has a really nice wingspan. He uses that to his advantage. Where, on and off ball defensively, I buy it. I just need him to add more strength, and hopefully he's able to utilize his athleticism in better ways. Not a defensive playmaker at all, and not creating any steals, deflections, or anything along those lines for you. But I do like the upside for a Bub Carrington defensively, where he can, if he's able to consistently lock in on that side of the ball, because I think he does try defensively. So Bub Carrington is a guy that right now probably isn't going to be anything defensively, because I do think the athleticism concerns are legitimate, and he is a defensive playmaker, but he's a guy that tries, adds more strength. He could be a serviceable on-ball defender for you. And then Keyshawn George, I just don't buy the frame to where he can guard on the perimeter and guard bigger wings and bigger guards. That's probably my biggest concern from defensively, because he does compete, and defensively, that is where his flashes, athleticism are the most. He has the most athletic flashes on the defensive end, where he's able to get blocks at the rim or scramble a contest on the weak side with closeouts. I would imagine he's probably more of a G leaguer this season, but if he is on the roster, I expect some struggles from Keyshawn George early on, but hopefully down the stretch he's able to shore those up and be a more consistent player on the defensive side of the floor. With that being said, let's take a look at the strengths and weaknesses for this team before we wrap things up here with this episode. Strength number one, I completely buy into the youth movement here in Washington. Shout out to them for not being helplessly mediocre and sticking around with Bradley Beal for the long term. They get off of Bradley Beal. They got Chris Paul on that deal. They let Chris Paul walk. I'm sorry, no, I think they wound up trading Chris Paul. They trade Chris Paul, and that's how they got Jordan Peele. But the youth movement here in Washington is something I really, really buy into, where even if you want to include Jordan Poole into that mix. Jordan Poole, Bub Carrington, Alex Sarr, Keyshawn George, Bub Carrington, if I didn't say Bub already, Bilal Coulibaly, they have a bunch of high upside youth talent here in Washington. You combine them with the fact that I'm projecting to be pretty bad next season, and you have a loaded draft class. The youth movement here in Washington is something I'm really, really excited about. And like I was saying, with the youth movement, Washington has every incentive to be really, really bad, as their pick, if it falls outside of the top 10, would wind up with the Knicks. So Washington in a generational draft class does not want to be mediocre and get the 15th pick, and you miss out on a Dylan Harper, an Ace Bailey, and Nolan Traore, a BJ Edgecombe, a Cooper Flagg. No, let's be bad. And then New York, if you want our pick next year, sure, to hell with it, right? You could have the 26th pick if that conveys then, right? Be bad. I'm happy with the youth movement. They're going to let these guys grow and develop. And then I think the off-ball scoring is a legitimate strength of this team, where they have a bunch of guys that can score without the ball actively in their hands. Jordan Poole, Corey Kispert, Kyle Kuzma even. Alex Sarr, I think year one will be that. You have Bilal Coulibaly, Bub, I think even. Keyshawn George. The amount of guys on this roster, Malcolm Brogdon, the amount of guys on this roster that can find different ways to score off the ball via cutting, via off-screen stuff, or spot-up, catch-and-shoot opportunities, I think it's a legitimate strength of this team. You have to be wary of where these guys are at all times on the floor. I think this team is relatively deep. We went through a lot of guys on this roster that could actually play. Even Marvin Bagley and Rashawn Holmes, who we didn't spend a ton of time on in this episode, are two guys that can really, really play and will be there to provide some depth. The weaknesses, I don't buy the defense for this team in general, because I think their backcourt is just going to be too bad defensively with Jordan Poole, Corey Kispert. I don't expect Brogdon, while he's here, to be this high-level defender. Bilal's good. Kuz is fine, but I think Kuz in this role where he isn't able to flash off his versatility isn't the same level defender. Is Alex Starr. Alex Starr is a good one, but I don't think he's going to be this ultra elite, high impact, Chet Holmgren, Wemby level defender year one. So with that being the case, I think defense is a reasonable concern year one. Self-creation scoring is a big concern of mine because, again, Kuz, the reliability in his jumper, Jordan Poole, the bad shots, the shot chucking, some of the inefficiency they had as a shooter last season. There's just not a lot of self-creation scoring, and then there's just not a lot of reliable playmaking. They have guys that can play make. They don't have real playmakers, if that makes sense. Jordan Poole can play make. Kyle Kuzma can play make. You have connected playmakers, but Brogdon can play make. But you don't have a bona fide playmaker on this roster. So we're going to go with reliable playmaking as another weakness. But guys, thank you all so much for tuning in here to the channel. This was a ton of fun. I hope you all enjoyed this breakdown of my number 29th ranked Washington Wizards team. We have a bunch of great content. We have a massive NCAA 25 or college football 25 rebuild. They'll be here on the channel. Don't miss that, as well as a bunch of other great film breakdown content. This power ranking series will continue throughout the summer. We are finishing this year, guys. Thank you all so much for watching. Please hit that like button and subscribe here to the channel if you haven't already. Till next, everybody. See ya, stay safe, and peace out.